Hi everyone, welcome to our low carbon fit out conversation. I'm Hulusi Mustafa, Environmental and Sustainability Manager. I have the pleasure of being joined here today with Mark Rogers from Turner and Townsend, Head of Net Zero Carbon Cost Management. Mark, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm really excited about today's conversation here. Mark is joining us to discuss the new carbon calculator tool, which Turner and Townsend have just released this year. But more importantly, Mark, it'd be great to get a background of yourself and how you've ended up here.
That's a really good question. What we've been doing at Turner and Townsend over the last 4 or 5 years was developing all of our cost management tools and putting them onto our Hive digital platform. So one of the roles that I had was looking at the cost planning aspect of that. So we finished that a few years back, and then the natural extension of what we were doing was to start looking at carbon and integrating that into cost planning. So from that point on, we started looking at how we actually developed the tool. And I think the more we got into it, the more interested I got into the whole carbon and sustainability aspect of the construction industry.
Sure.
And we've just took it from there. So yeah, we've developed the tool over the last sort of year, 18 months. And it's been really exciting journey, to be honest. I've loved learning about carbon and the impact that the built environment has on the planet. And it's been a really good journey talking to lots of different people, doing something different, and looking at how we as professionals within the industry can help reduce the carbon footprint and the impact of construction.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you're probably finding that actually clients are really wanting this at the moment. And interestingly, coming from a consultancy background myself, I think the best people positioned to at least inform on a stage-by-stage basis and at least establish baselines on embodied carbon are probably QSs, because you've got all that data at your fingertips. So are you seeing clients now saying to you, without introduction to the tool, actually we want to start measuring embodied carbon on this project?
Yeah, we are. We're seeing that quite a lot, and it's been really interesting the last probably 6 to 9 months. The uptake and the increase that we're seeing from clients, the request to come in to say, look, we need help. We want to understand our baseline position for embodied carbon.
Sure.
And we see the QS as being the natural person to help with this.
Absolutely.
We see that because we're measuring the quantities for the project, we can use the quantities to then apply the carbon emissions to that, very much in the same way that we do with cost.
Sure.
So from our point of view as cost managers, we've got two currencies of construction now, is cost and carbon. So increasingly clients are saying, well, the QS should be the person that can help us start that position and understand the baseline.
Sure. And maybe an obvious question, but of course, in money terms on a project, we're talking, pounds per square meter and pounds per square feet in terms of cost value. What's the metric in terms of embodied carbon?
It's kilograms of carbon per square meter. So that's the intensity of carbon across the building area. And again, measured in a similar way to cost. So we quantify the total amount of carbon and divide that by the area of the building, and that can be used as the comparison to either things like the LETI guide and the standards or clients' own benchmark or targets.
Sure, and I would assume that clients are now using that tool as a way of saying, okay, so this is what our baseline embodied carbon would be. Yeah. Here's maybe an enhanced embodied carbon. Here's maybe an even further enhanced embodied carbon number. So you can, in effect, say in the same way as cost, we want this type of budget project, we want this sort of budget project in terms of carbon as well.
Exactly the same. Yeah. So we treat carbon like we do with cost. So it's value managing carbon in the same way we do cost. So we start off with a position, a baseline, so the initial sort of target, and then look to try and improve that position with the client, working with the design team together and the contractors as well when they get appointed. So how do we drive a better outcome? And I think the beauty of the tool that we've developed as well is that we can do this from Reba 2, so we can do it really early on in the design stage. And that gives a much better opportunity to make significant improvements to the design. So at the same time, we can inform the client of how much the carbon reduction initiatives cost, which gives the client the opportunity to make informed decisions around their business case. So if I want to go from this position to a much better carbon position, what's the cost or
Sure.
program impact of
Sure,
that.
sure, absolutely. And I suppose in terms of the way that tool reports embodied carbon and the value at stage 2 to say actually if you want nice stone ceramic flooring, well actually this has this level of embodied carbon. The alternative would be carpet or wooden flooring.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose that's the sort of high level analysis that you're able to provide. And the next step of that in terms of carpet tile A, carpet tile B, I presume is the natural step to allow the designers to then further investigate that and obviously look for EPDs, environmental product declarations from manufacturers regarding specific types of carpet tile.
Correct. Yeah, you can look at it from a two-product
Yeah.
point of view comparison to say, as you said, a tile is much higher in embodied carbon than carpet, for example. And then, once you've honed down that decision-making process to the product that's been selected, it's then saying, okay, so if we have a look across the manufacturers and we get the specific EPDs, then where should we be looking? Where's the best carbon performing product that we can find?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so let's just imagine, I presume you're working on tons of projects at the moment. We get to the end of stage 4 and you've done the carbon calculator and it's showing that there's X amount of embodied carbon associated with the fit out. What are generally clients looking to do with that number once they have it? Because obviously at that point it's just a number.
Again, a really good question, because I think what clients are looking to do is understand obviously how they've improved from their initial starting point, but then from that point adding on the operational carbon to understand the whole of life carbon impact of the fit out, so they know what they have to offset.
Absolutely.
So they can use it as part of that decision-making process as well.
Sure. And are you seeing clients using this as part of their net zero carbon strategy as well? Obviously, a lot of companies have 2030 net zero carbon strategies. We as a group do. And so are they using that as a tool to say, these are all our projects, this is the embodied carbon, we're going to offset that?
Yeah, you're right. We've, funnily enough, we had a meeting yesterday with a client and they're looking to update their existing estate. So as part of that decision-making process, it's looking at the embodied carbon really early on in the design stage, so that they can make a lot of informed decisions to get to that net zero target that they're looking for by 2030. So it's that starting point on that sort of roadmap and that counting to zero position.
Sure. And there's a lot of talk. There was a lot of talk in the industry at one point whether it's better to demolish and build new, or whether we should retain as much as possible and refurbish, retrofit. And I think generally the consensus has been try as best as possible to use what's there and retrofit. How do you factor that in terms of your embodied carbon calculations, the existing elements that are there? How do you sort of benchmark that?
Well, at the moment, we're not looking at what's there at the in the building as it stands. So it's looking at the interventions sort of going forward. So it's like what's taken out, and then what are the new materials that go into the building. So it's counting that new construction. Of the building.
Interesting. So, Mark, what are Turner and Townsend doing in terms of educating, I think, both internally your teams and also externally clients about this fantastic carbon tool?
Yeah, so what we did this time last year, actually, is we developed a net zero guide for our cost managers, and we rolled out that document as a training piece to all of our cost management teams around the UK. So we've each cost centre around the UK has got a net zero carbon champion in the cost management teams. And it's really good, actually, because what we found is that people put themselves forward for this because it's such a new, interesting topic. So we had a really good bunch of volunteers around the country. So they rolled out the training. So what is carbon? Why do we need to reduce it? What's the impact of it? So that went out in November, December last year. So that then started building the awareness. What we've done with the carbon calculator itself and the launch, we've obviously done our press releases and told the industry what we're doing. But we've also then developed a client-facing sort of slide deck that we've gone to talk to all of our key clients about. We've had round tables. We had one up in Scotland about 2 or 3 weeks ago, where we got a group of consultants and clients together and just had a conversation like we are today, and just sharing experiences, but also obviously telling the clients what we can do and how the tool can benefit them. So we've done a different approach with the staff internally, and then looking externally to all of our clients and saying, well, how can we really help you? And it's been fantastic. The response we've had from clients has been brilliant. They're all really interested. I think they've all got a different approach at the moment, or a different level of understanding about how they're going to take this forward in their businesses and how they're going to drive carbon to their net zero targets that they're looking for. So it's been, again, a really interesting journey over the last sort of 4 or 5 months since we've released the tool, and just exciting talking to people in industry.
And I think it's a really exciting time across the industry. And I think for a period of time, there has been concerns around people understanding these metrics, embodied carbon, operational carbon. And I think the whole upskilling part of it is really crucial to driving true net zero carbon change. So it's fantastic that Turner and Townsend are really spearheading that. And the question in terms of internally, is it just, obviously you don't just do, Turner and Townsend don't just do QSing, there's project management, etc. Are you seeing other parts of the business, people wanting to get involved with carbon calculating?
Yeah, well, we've got a net zero carbon team, so we've got a sustainability team within the business, as well as what we do in cost management. But yeah, there is so much interest from across the whole of the UK, from different areas, as you said, the project managers and so on. We're constantly getting asked to go and talk to clients and help them out, which is fantastic. But we're also seeing this globally. So, the other regions around the world for the business are getting in touch and saying, we've seen you've got this. How do we then translate that into what we do here in America or Asia or wherever it may be? So again, that part of what I'm doing is helping globalize the tool so that we can use it across everywhere around the world. And that's particularly important for some of our sort of global clients, where they want to be able to capture the differences and benchmark different or similar projects across different locations.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
And Mark, do you see any challenges that you're facing at the moment, or foresee in terms of implementing this carbon calculator?
I suppose one of the challenges that we've had, I guess, has been, and this is an industry-wide thing, is around the data. We've got a really good set of emissions data that we've used, but I think that needs to continue to develop and evolve. It's pretty mature here in the UK and Europe. But there are more products being added to that sort of database of EPDs as time goes on. So getting that reliability of the data source and increasing that, I think, is a challenge. And I think we need to share as an industry. We need to be really good at sharing the data that is around and is going to evolve. So I think at the moment that would be one of the areas that I see as probably the key challenges, but improving, I think, as time goes on.
Absolutely, and I think we've seen similar issues around getting hold of that embodied carbon data. And there's obviously a lot of manufacturers who do sometimes their own internal, self-declarations of embodied carbon. But we're obviously looking at, true environmental product declarations in line with the relevant EN standards, which is where we want to be, so that we've got a consistent data set. And so with this tool, are you then able potentially to leverage manufacturers to say, look, we want to be using true carbon data and we want to plug that into our tool, but we need EPDs? Are you seeing any kind of feedback from supply chain with your tool?
Not right at the moment, but you're right. I guess going forward, it could be something that we can do.
Yeah.
The more specific products and information that we get into it, the better it is. And I guess, sort of looking at that from a wider industry perspective, I think what the suppliers, manufacturers should be doing is thinking, okay, well, my products at the moment are scored or have this amount of emissions. How do I improve that? And I think that's the thing that we've got to do as the industry between us, isn't it? Is like try and help drive improvement throughout the supply chain, So we'll get to a position where we do a lot of good stuff together and collaborate as the design team and contractor team to reduce embodied carbon. We might get to a point where we get to a sort of natural leveling off. But then how do we work with the supply chain, the manufacturers, to get even better? How do we help them reduce their carbon emissions in their production, in their transport, in their process, and also, the actual activities on site? So I see, just by bringing this into the forefront of discussions in projects, so having that debate about carbon right at the beginning, just like we do with cost, is saying, right, we've got to talk about this. The traditional time, cost, quality triangle has got that fourth dimension now, hasn't it? It's got carbon there. So it's part of that debate. So how do we get to a better outcome? Well, building low carbon, but also looking at the right products and helping the supply chain, as I said, to drive a bit of innovation into what they do. And we are seeing that.
Absolutely. Mark, I think a lot of our listeners will be keen to know what examples do you have that you can share with us, hopefully, on how your tool has helped reduce embodied carbon of fit outs.
Yeah, there's one client that we're working with who've got a global real estate portfolio. So we've been working with them to try and reduce the emissions. So what we've done is identified some different products, different materials, and just different solutions. So we've set a baseline, obviously, from one of their projects, and we've worked with them and the designers to reduce that. Which, you take that across all of the portfolio going forward, makes a significant difference.
Sure. And then in terms of specific examples, we discussed earlier regarding, a carpet tile versus, ceramic stone flooring. Do you have any kind of like high level examples of where option A would be, worse in terms of embodied carbon than option B, and what you kind of commonly see as a change that is a result of that tool?
So on fit out, I guess there's a couple of areas that we see. There are simple things like suspended ceilings. Do you need to put them in? And we're seeing a bit of a trend moving away from them and having exposed surfaces. We're obviously looking with the client and the design team around furniture, sort of reuse. Do you need to have new furniture on your fit outs? Can we take stuff from an existing building? Can it be repurposed, reused? So that's an area that I think clients are really looking at the moment. And then it is about materiality, isn't it? So it is just looking at the right products, also matching that up with the life expectancy of the fit out. Are you putting in something that you can reuse as well? Looking at the amount of glazed partitions and just things like demountable partitions. Are you going to be able to move that and reuse it in the future?
Yeah.
So there's a few different things.
And just to touch on that's really interesting in this kind of concept of circular economy, right? So how does your tool or, the outputs or reports from that tool factor in circular economy? So that example you gave there, which is, a reusable, demountable glazed partition system, I suppose whilst it's got a high embodied carbon, providing there's the right mechanisms for reuse, so warranty, labour, etc. How does your tool factor in the fact that it can be reused a number of times?
Well, at the moment, the tool just looks at the embodied carbon for that installation. So we're not factoring in that circularity, but I think that is just part of the overall discussion with the team and the client to say, actually, yes, we need to look at not just embodied carbon, but the operational carbon, because there could be an impact by choosing a better product from an embodied carbon point of view. It impacts adversely on the operational carbon. So it's really just having that conversation right now and just saying, okay, well, we need to look at the whole of life. And yes, if we can use a product 3 times in 3 different buildings, then that's obviously a lot better than one that we have to demolish after a period of time.
Sure. And when we talk about the period of that life cycle, what's your baseline number of years in terms of that embodied carbon or that whole life cycle assessment?
Well, the life cycle assessment could be different. I mean, that's just dependent on the client. I mean,
Yeah.
we would probably look at something like 60 years as a normal whole of life cost and carbon scenario. Embodied carbon is only in the production of the material and getting it to site, so that cradle to gate. So it's only taking into that into account.
So, Mark, the term embodied carbon has been something which the industry and actually a lot of the general public have been hearing about for a couple of years now. Where do you see the current state of play in the industry in terms of how we are able to measure embodied carbon?
What I see from my point of view is that there are a lot of different tools out there that can measure carbon. So there's probably not as much consistency as there should be. I mean, it is a new and evolving area. We've obviously got the RICS Whole of Life Carbon Assessment Guide, which we should be following, which we follow as our tool and as our company. And I think we do need to try and drive to that level of consistency so we can compare and benchmark on a lot more of an equal footing.
And from my experience, I think the general fit out materials, your floor finishes, wall coverings, even furniture actually, have become much better over the past few years in terms of reporting embodied carbon through EPDs. Mm-hmm. But I think one area where we've seen a bit of a shortfall is around M&E. Mm-hmm. And the data there. Obviously, you'll probably mention around CIBSE. There's been new tools released to calculate that. But where do you see the M&E area of this embodied carbon calculator going?
Well, I think it's a wider than just our calculator on this. I think there's less data, as you said, around the EPDs for all of the components of the MEP installation, and I think that's part of the challenge because at an early design stage, we, as an industry, we don't measure, we don't even design all the cables, conduits, pipes, etc., etc. So it's a lot harder to put the embodied carbon emissions to quantities which don't exist. So I think there's a fair bit of work to do in that area to try and get again that level of consistency to get to a point where we can understand how to do it properly, and again to baseline and to set targets from.
Absolutely, and I do think the M&E sector does need to get better at getting that embodied carbon data. Obviously, it's challenging in terms of getting EPDs for each individual kind of sensor, cable, conduit, etc. However, I think in terms of the CIBSE, I believe is it TM65, TM65 tool that does allow manufacturers to report the materials that go into it and the percentage as a total of its weight, and therefore infer carbon figures from that. So I'm sure you'll agree with me that we need to get better at drawing that information out of them. Mark, what do you see the next steps in the industry in terms of carbon?
What I see is that it's got to be just part of the general project process, isn't it? I think it's got to inform the business case from an early stage. So clients and the design teams have got to be looking and thinking about it. As I said before, it's that fourth dimension of a project, isn't it? So it's what do we do? What does the client do at the early stage? Are they going to build new? Are they going to refurbish? Are they going to do nothing? So I think it's really got to be part of that decision-making process. So what's the right carbon outcome for the project? So I think that's got to happen. Whether that becomes part of legislation in terms of planning applications to say there needs to be a whole of life carbon assessment, probably. I think that's what we should be doing. I think that's really key actually going forward. It informs the business case and the planning process.
So Mark, how do you see the role of a QS changing?
Well, I think the role has actually changed already because, as I mentioned before, there are now two currencies of construction, so cost and carbon. As the QS, we're ideally placed to measure and count the embodied carbon in projects. When we do the measurement of the building, we capture all the quantities, so we can put the carbon emissions to that. So I think that is how our role will continue going forward, and I think it'll be really part of our role to help clients on that journey to reduce their carbon emissions. I don't think it's just going to be a natural part of the conversation around what we do in a project. So that value management of carbon will become part of our role. And I think integrated into that will be not just looking at the embodied carbon or capital cost, it's also looking at the operational cost and operational carbon to give that whole of life cost and carbon perspective to clients. And I see that coming more and more into our scope, and that has happened over the last 6 months. We're seeing clients increasingly ask for that. They're moving away from just looking at the capital, the here and the now, to what's the impact over 30 years, 60 years, whatever it might be of the project. So I see our role sort of evolving in that way, being a lot more closely involved in the decision-making process. And I think the other reason why the QS role has changed and why the QS, the cost manager, is the right person to measure, count carbon, is that we're independent of the design team. You know, it's obviously great that the architects and the engineers can do that, and then they can count carbon for their parts of the design they're responsible for. But again, like with cost, we're independent of the design team, so we can really challenge what the designers are coming up with and trying to get a better outcome without any other sort of agenda around what the design might look like. So again, taking just that impartial view on how do we drive a much better carbon position.
So, Mark, final question before we leave you. If there was one thing you could change in the industry that would make the biggest difference, what would that be?
I think for me, it's probably collaboration and sharing data, knowledge, and information. We're all on this learning journey together. This is all new for all of us. So I think it's really important that we all help each other. We're all trying to achieve the same thing in terms of reducing carbon emissions and improving the environment for the planet. So I think that data share is really important. You know, we're looking. There are initiatives out there with the Built Environment Carbon Database, the BCIS, looking at how to capture data for carbon and how to use that going forward. So I think my one ask would be that we do work together as an industry and try and just get as much information and data and learning together as we can.
I completely agree with you on that. Mark, thank you for your time today. Been really interesting to hear about what TNT are doing and to hear from yourself as well and where the industry is moving. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. You can listen to the whole conversation on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from.